I wrote a book a few years ago called Change Magic, about organisational change. And unfortunately, I didn't actually sit down with Guy to talk about what I was going to do today until Friday morning. So it was too late to do it, but I've ordered a copy for everybody, and Guy's going to send that out from here, so everybody will get a copy of that book. Thank you. What? Oh no. Yeah, yes. That sounds right. And a bargain as well. That sounds like one of the rare second-hand copies. Yeah, that's normal. I mean, that's slightly discounted, obviously. You know what Amazon are like, but no. So we're going to get a copy. So they'll be here in about a week, and then they'll send those on to everybody. So start with a question, which is, what is culture? This is typical of the answer I get from everybody in every industry, so that's completely normal. But how would you define it?
Behaviours, rules, rituals of a group of people.
Behaviours, rules and rituals of a group of people. Interesting. How would you know that they were a group of people?
Bonded by a common goal.
Common goal, okay, interesting. Anybody else got a definition for what is culture?
Practices that evolve.
Practices that evolve?
Over time and challenges.
Okay, alright, interesting. Anybody else?
Common set of values.
Common set of values. Yeah, a culture could have a common set of values, yeah.
I would say what it feels like.
What it feels like, that's exactly what most people say. Over the last 20 odd years that I've asked this question, what most people say is, well, you can't define it. It's what it feels like. It's what it's like. You just know. And the problem with just knowing is if you can't define something, you can't create it. Just imagine what maths tests would be like if you just know what the right answer is. It'd be like English, wouldn't it? Well, that's a rubbish essay because you didn't explain this thing. Next week, send the same essay in. Well, that's a really interesting metaphor you've used there. I had an English teacher when I was doing my A-levels, which was recently, obviously. And his marking of our homework was entirely dependent, apparently, on what mood he was in at the time. And so what we learned collectively as a class was how to time the submission of our homework rather than how to write good essays. And that's what happens in cultures. That's what, and you know, we've all experienced that. Joining an organisation that says it's like one thing and then it turns out to be a bit different, and we have to figure it out as we go along. So if we can't define it, we can't create it. So how do we go about defining culture? Well, how do you recognise culture first? How do you know where you are? How do you know where you are right now? How do you know that you are not in your normal place of work? Other than the journey, if you woke up and here you are, which may happen at some point during my session, how do you know that you're here and not in your normal place or at home? You see the environment, okay, good. What else?
People.
You see different people than you normally see, yeah, okay, good.
Artifacts around the room.
Yeah. Everything in this room is communicating with us. Everything. I remember many years ago, like 30 years ago, reading this ancient website on subliminal marketing, and it made a really interesting point that I've never forgotten, which is that when you look at like a marketing photo, like an advert in a magazine, that photo wasn't taken accidentally. Every single thing in that picture was put there and staged, even the time on the clock. Even the people in the photo, who is making eye contact with who. All of that is set up to communicate to you. Everything around this room is communicating to you. It's all saying, this is what we, collectively in this room, whoever put this stuff there, want you to know. May or may not be true, but it's what these people want us to know.
We should have seen it an hour ago before we tied it up. And everything you need to know.
And how did you know what to wear today? Did you just pick out what you always wear? Or Is anybody wearing anything different to what you normally wear?
Actually, it's to do with mood and feeling,
Okay.
weather, and audience.
An audience, yes.
Well, where are you going? I won't come here in jeans and trainers today.
Ah. And is that how you normally dress for work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Condition and convention, I would say.
Convention, yeah. So you thought, well, who's going to be there and what are they like and what are they going to think of me and what am I going to think of them and all of those sorts of things. And you've got, who's got rules about school uniform? And who has students who don't always entirely follow the rules? So do you have rules about, for example, branded clothing or clothing with slogans or messages or things like that on? And do those rules get bent sometimes? Yeah. And they're all forms of communication. So what do I want this group of people who I might not have met before, what do I want them to know about me? Have you ever had a job where you were a square peg in a round hole? And you couldn't quite put your finger on it, but you just knew you didn't fit in? Has anybody ever had a job like that? Or been in a place like that? Or been at a party like that? Or been sitting at a dinner table with a group of people like that?
Quite a lot, actually.
Quite a lot. So, in terms of defining culture, if we can't measure it, we can't change it. And that sounds like such a simplistic little thing, isn't it? That comes from, what was his name? The management guru, the theory X and theory Y. Sort of very black and white. People are like this or like this. You can only change what you can. You can only change what you can measure. But if you think about it, for example, if you don't measure it, then you can't know that it's changing. Then it is just guessing. Then it is just, well, it feels different. It feels better. I like it, so therefore it's improved. And one of the biggest problems with change, all kinds of change, not just culture change, all sorts of change, is with intention. What I hear almost everybody say in every organisation I've ever worked with is, we've got a really good idea. No, you haven't. You've got an idea. You don't know that it's good yet. And secondly, yeah, we're going to change this thing about the way that we do business. We're going to improve this. We've got a new improvement plan. We've got a new improvement project. No, you haven't. You're going to change things, but you have no way of knowing that it's improved unless you measure it afterwards. I mean, that's, not that this is complicated. I mean, you were all experienced CEOs, so nothing I'm going to tell you today is going to be complicated or new. You already know how to create cultures, right? Because you have done, sometimes by accident. But if we can't measure it, we don't know that it's changing. But measuring it in itself doesn't make it change. If you plant some sunflower seeds and you measure them every day, that doesn't make them grow faster. But what it does is tell you whether the things that you are doing, like watering it, are influencing the way that it grows. So measuring in itself doesn't change anything, although sometimes it can, where human beings are involved, because of course anything that we measure is another form of communication. So I was in a head teacher's office last week, and I'm always interested when I go into people's offices at what they put on the walls. I always look very carefully at those things. And on this head teacher's wall, there were just 3 big whiteboards, and all they had on them was attendance figures by year, by week. That was it. Because his thinking is that in his school, there's an attendance problem, and until they fix the attendance problem, nothing else can, any other thing that they try to change or improve will have limited effectiveness. Sounds fine as a bit of logical reasoning, and I've heard many, many people in the education system say the same thing. Well, if the kids aren't in the classroom, you can't teach them. That's assuming they only learn if we're teaching them. It's assuming they only learn something useful if we're teaching them, if they're in a classroom. But that assumption aside, just measuring attendance and just telling everybody that is measuring attendance isn't changing it in itself, but it is letting people know that's the priority. And a lot of the time I'll go into CEOs and senior managers' offices and they'll have motivational posters on the wall, or a poster of our vision and values, because just telling people what our values is, that's always a really good way to change culture. So I'm going to define culture in a very simple way. It's language plus rules. So if you think about language in your organisation, you have a language that's common to the education sector. And when I first became a trustee of a trust, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago or something, I had no idea what most people were talking about, and I used to get my phone out in every trust board meeting and Google acronyms, because I had no idea what, and I'd read what the acronym meant, and it still didn't mean anything to me. So I'd have to go and read some thing. There's no glossary of terms. But there's a language, and you have a different language for things. And when you, for example, you're talking to your friends who don't work in education, let's say, and you say, oh, we're doing this, whatever it is, and they say, what's that? And when you explain it to them, they say, oh, I know what that is. I've just never heard it called that before. So you have your language, and language is a way of creating belonging, because language is one of the things that marks out people for being different. And then rules, and you mentioned rules, and some other people mentioned rules as well. Rules that say what people do and what people don't do, and what happens in this culture, and rules like there's a coffee, tea, things, kitchen area outside, and you go and help yourself to a drink anytime you want. Assuming you know how to work the funny tap and you know where the spoons are, and you might have to ask somebody, and you might feel like you don't want to ask, and so you think, oh, I'll just go to the coffee shop across the road. It's better coffee anyway, and you'll make up some reason about how that's a good thing to do. So culture, if we define culture very simply as language and rules, then, for example, let's say every so often, every, I don't know, month, term, year, whatever it is, you have a conversation with a member of your team that's about reviewing their performance. What do you call that conversation?
Professional growth.
You call it a professional growth what?
Conversation.
You call it a professional growth conversation. What else?
Just call it a dialogue.
A dialogue.
We use line management support.
Line management support. Any other? Appraisal.
Professional development.
A professional development
Conversation.
conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And in other organisations, they would call it a review, a one-to-one, a coaching session. All kinds of different words for it. And the language, you might say, well, that doesn't matter, that's just what we call it. But what you call it tells somebody about what to expect when they enter into it. Just like the title of a book or a film tells you what to expect. Just like the title of a training course tells you what to expect. So if you're sent, if you get an email from HR saying you've been sent on a stress management training course, what are they telling you?
You're stressed.
And you're stressed and you're not managing it. They're telling you something. And therefore, if we think about even how what we call meetings, when we send out invites, if we think about what we call a meeting, we start to change the language, which changes expectations, which changes behaviour, because that changes how people come into the room. Because a meeting doesn't start when you say, right, okay, everybody, let's start. It started the moment that your SLT left home in the morning, you decided what to wear. And I thought, oh, God, we got them whatever meeting today. And they started mentally rehearsing on the journey, just like you've all done.
I think there's some prerequisites to a conversation, you know.
Yeah?
And I'm probably speaking from experience. So when you are either summoned or invited or whatever, there is a power struggle there anyway. Not a struggle, but there may be there's something there.
There may be
that is not
a perceived power imbalance.
Yeah, so that person, you know more than me, but I'm just talking as a school person. So there's a lot of work to be done before this.
Well, it's interesting you were talking about power imbalance and then said that I knew more than you.
Well, because you're leading the session today, so I assume...
Well, it doesn't mean I know more, it just means I'm the idiot who's prepared to stand up
I assume you know
here.
far more than me, because I'm just reading your genius coach and your genius and your CPD work, so I'm sure you're carrying... And I'm thinking about how would I have you in my school doing what
Right.
for my staff, so...
Yeah.
At the moment, we're not there yet, you're helping us. But what I would probably say is, I personally believe, having been on the receiving end of meetings and things, you want to be emotionally strong to be able to manage a meeting that's going to go well.
Right. Yeah. So you'll mentally rehearse that before you walk in there.
But I've had to rehearse that, and probably that's my experiences.
Well, that's what we all do as humans.
Yeah.
We mentally rehearse
Yeah.
everything. That's what we, it's one of the
When
jobs
I
of
signed
the
up for
mind
this, I did
is.
think to myself, how is this going to help me? How are we defining culture? Is it from people's experience? I identify as a marginalised group, and I've come to learn what the posts people are thinking about culture,
Right.
and how it's not its imposition, because I know they're all well-meaning, but the fact of the matter is, we still have a culture of inequity, injustice, and you're one person that's going to be supporting us to do the best in what we do.
Right.
But you can't get away from policy, practice, and the feelings of people outside who still don't feel things change.
Right. And so how do we
But I will
measure
now be
inequity?
quiet because I do talk a lot.
How do we measure inequity? And how do we communicate that to people? And how do we demonstrate that that's changing? And how do we measure that? And a large part of that is how people feel. And there's plenty of places I go to where I don't feel like I belong. But then I get on and do whatever I have to do anyway.
Yeah.
Because belonging isn't the most important thing in that situation. Other situations it is.
I think it could be massively shaped or tested by adversity sometimes, just thinking about it, It's easy when it's the good times, isn't it? And
Yeah.
you think, let's devise all this ethos stuff together and it's all wonderful, but actually it's only when you get some pressure from outside that's the time to really,
Exactly.
should really
And
get
you
tested.
mentioned common goals. More important is common enemies.
Yeah.
Common what?
Common enemies. And we've seen a lot of that in election campaigning, creating fictitious, perhaps, common enemies that stir people up. We saw that with the riots that took place up and down the country.
And it almost gets shaped a little bit as well, maybe modified, because you might think, do you know what, we learnt a little bit of a lesson there, and actually that's what we're about, or is that what we're about? And you're just doing a little bit of adjustment and asking
Yeah.
yourself some questions as well. So
And that's a really important point we'll come on to, that, one of the things that show you what your culture really is, not what you'd like to think it is. So, what do you call somebody who's just joined the teaching profession? That's answered.
Training to be a teacher, which is in the last year, and I'm trying to convince her not to do it, but she's adamant.
So that's interesting, because
ECT.
that's answered my second question. ECT.
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard them called newly qualified teachers, or what is
that
it?
was- yes.
Early careers teachers.
Yes.
What do you really call them?
Experts.
Experts. What are the staff in the staff?
Gen something. They're a gen something.
Gen Z.
I don't know what gen they are. Don't get know that as well.
Right.
We call them that.
So what do the staff in the staff room call the ECTs?
Newbies,
Newbies,
things like that.
fresh meat.
Yeah.
Enthusiastic.
Sorry,
Enthusiastic, naive.
naive.
Yeah.
Right. What do you say about Ofsted inspectors?
Hold them in the highest esteem.
He must be an inspector.
Sorry,
He must be an inspector.
No,
he's just worried one's in the room. Yeah. What do you say about Ofsted inspectors?
varied. Yeah.
depends who they are.
I've heard it all, so say it. And we're all, amongst friends, so
Well, they vary. Some
they vary. Some are
brilliant and others are idiots.
okay.
Not like people.
And again, there's stuff that we say about Ofsted inspectors in a forum like this, and then there might be things that we say about Ofsted inspectors when nobody's listening, or when we would do different people.
Actually, I think only particular ones. I think there is an element of, it's a hard job to do. Nobody denies that. But
Yeah.
at the same time, when you get somebody who just won't shift their mindset, and you think, wow,
Yeah.
they're very frustrated, but that's a people thing.
We tend
Yes.
to use two phrases. They just don't get us, or they do get us.
Very good.
Luckily, after 4 hours of mental health training, it's all sorted now.
So there's language. There's the language we use publicly. There's the language that we use privately. There's the language that we use for things. There's the language that we use when we're communicating, like vision and values, and interested in a career in teaching, and the power to transform education. These are all examples of the...
Should we actually have a language that we use all the time that is the same, because then that reflects your personal qualities. You can't have a value of, I don't know, kindness written up somewhere if you then have a language that you use in one place that is different to a language that you use in other places.
So we'll talk about that when we come on to the speed of change. However, your vocabulary is different. Do you have children?
Yeah.
Yeah, your vocabulary is different with your colleagues than with your children, than with an angry parent.
But you still take to that conversation your personal values, and surely a culture should be reflective of the values of that, and you model it at all times.
Well, I would say the culture is reflective.
Well, it doesn't mean you walk around all the time being this person that, you know, is practically perfect in every way, Mary Poppins, but I think you take your values to your experience, and that the point you made about society being tested recently, or you might get tested, is when there's a conflict, and that's when it really challenges you on how you live through your values.
Isn't it just better to be genuine?
Yeah.
Isn't it hard work to be something else?
Well, personally, I think it's always better to be genuine. However, there are people who would say, but there's this situation where, but you can't tell them that, but you...
But we also, I mean, I agree with Sarah. I think you have good day and bad day behaviours, don't you? And so the shift in trying to do the good day behaviours when it really matters, you know, if anyone pretends they don't have bad day behaviours, and so defining what the good day behaviours look like for all of us, that we can talk to each other, starts to create a culture, and to hold each other to account. My team are well versed in guy you're doing it again sort of things that stop you from, you know, monologuing and pretending there's dialogue when you don't need it and all that.
Chelsea, I think this might be the handout file rather than the presentation file. Did you open this from an email?
Yes, sorry.
Sorry.
Just while we're sorting that, Peter, is it worth now, because the trains and traffic issues just going around and everyone saying who they are?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
So, Guy Shears, Central Region Schools Trust.
Michelle Miles, CEO of the Castle Phoenix Trust.
David Cochet, CEO of Benchworth Trust.
Becky Clare, Trustee for Quality of Education at Castle Phoenix Trust.
I'm Paul Baldridge, CEO of the Academy Trust. Lee Williams, CEO of Central Academy Trust. Mark Pillard from the Force Team.
Sorry.
CEO of the WMG Academy Trust.
Jonathan Smart, Deputy CEO of Excelsior.
That one.
Sarah Mayland, CEO of Triumph Learning Trust.
How do we full screen it?
Ravina Dar, Cromwell Learning Community Trust.
Thank you.
Chris Jack, Futures Trust.
Yeah,
Sarah
great.
Finch, CEO of the Marches Academy Trust, Shropshire.
Everybody? That was okay, lovely. So, rules, the other part of, so we had culture was language plus rules. And rules, we have two types of rules. We have explicit rules and tacit rules. So explicit rule is written down. It's spoken. We tell people what the explicit rules are. We put them in handbooks and policies, and we put them on posters and so on. And then we have tacit rules, and tacit rules are not written down. And they're passed on not by word of mouth, but by observing what people do. So observing that, that's the drawer where the spoons are, and that's what people do with their old tea bags. And we watch people and we try and figure out what the rules are. Wrong button. I'd like to write down on a piece of paper one explicit rule that you have in your mat. It can be anything at all, but one rule that it could be to staff, students, everybody, it could be to anything. Doesn't matter what it is. But write down one explicit rule that you have. Could be about times, could be about responsibilities, could be about the environment, could be about behaviour, could be about anything at all. My school had a rule that said you weren't allowed to eat outside the school gates in school uniform. It harmed the school's reputation. If somebody saw a boy from my school eating a bag of crisps in school uniform, what would people think? Horrifying, I know. So you got one? What? Somebody give me an example of what you've written down as your rule. Michelle, what have you got?
Respect to all from all.
Respect to all from all, very good. What's yours?
Please be punctual.
Please be punctual, excellent. For you?
You can't smoke or vape on any of our sites.
Can't smoke or vape on any of our sites, fantastic.
I'm doing the disciplinary at the moment, but there you go.
Right, okay, very good. So, so that's your explicit rule. Now the tacit rule is the unspoken part. And a tacit rule will always override or modify an explicit rule. So thinking about that explicit rule that you've just written down, I'd now like you to write down a tacit rule that overrides that, or influences that, or modifies that in some way. So for example, please be punctual, so that if we made that a really hard rule, we might say, you know, the day starts at 9 a.m, let's say. Is it 9 a.m, or is it 9 a.m. and a bit? Or it'd be a bit early. Well, I want to say 9 a.m. if you're in the SLT, I mean, what I really mean is 8 a.m. Or do I mean 9:15 if I like you, or 9:30 if I'm in a good mood, or 9:01 if I'm in a bad mood, or what do we mean? So think of the tacit rule that modifies that explicit rule. And think about what the effect of that is. Like respect to all from all. Do we always give respect? Does everybody always give respect to everybody?
Well, you think you do, but it's how others may perceive the way that you're talking to them.
Ah, so respect might mean something to different to different people as well. That's interesting. Do we always get respect? Does everybody always receive respect?
You'd hope so, but clearly not in large organisations.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because if they did, we probably wouldn't have a rule about it. Because we don't have a rule. Does anybody have a rule or a policy about breathing oxygen? No? Air in all classrooms.
Can you force respect?
Well, not who's who's forcing anything?
Well, I think to have a rule
Well,
is in itself saying you have an expectation.
well, we have a law of gravity, but I've never been, you know, prosecuted for floating.
I don't mean force in a terrible way, I just mean...
Yeah, just because people can choose to obey rules or not. That's the other thing. That's sort of concealed within your answer there. People don't have to follow rules. Because then we have rules about rules, don't we? You mentioned a disciplinary. So there's a rule about a rule. There's the rule. If you don't follow the rule, this is what happens.
You also have unconscious bias, don't you? So you will, the way that staff respond to certain families and parents, and can be amazing, but it can also be unspoken kind of derogatory or lack of respect, even though we're showing that we're being respectful sort of thing. So there's a whole series of things, well, it's myriad conflict.
Absolutely. I read a lovely thing in the BBC News either yesterday or the day before about the recent riots and all the push to get prosecutions and so on to show that, you know, the country is not descending into chaos. And there was something about this 14-year-old boy, and the police didn't take any further action because his parents were so angry they decided that was enough of a punishment for him. And I thought, maybe his parents are always that angry. Maybe that's why he's rioting. Because clearly it hasn't worked so far. So we have a tacit rule that modifies the explicit rule, and that has an effect. If we say the start time's 9 o'clock, but it's, you know, give or take either way, depending on whatever. What effect does that have on people? If you rush to be here for 9 o'clock and you spent 1 hour and 3/4 driving, and then somebody else wanders in at 9:45 and, so we waited for you, you're thinking, why did I rush?
That's an assumption you make.
Why did I risk getting a parking ticket? Why did I run from the car park? Why did
That's true, but there is a degree of tolerance and acceptance from everyone.
Of course, of course. But if you think if you're in a normal place of work, and that's happening every day, how does that start to make you feel? How does that start to make you feel?
I suppose it goes back to, obviously I confess to having been in the car now 45 minutes and been late and holding everybody outside. I suppose it goes back to your culture, isn't it, and the fact that what are the norms and the expectations and how you manage those, but you can still have rules, you can still have a concept of belonging and clarity around those, but you without having to go into the opposite position of threat and challenge and compliancy.
Right. So from a performance management point of view, absolutely. So from the performance management point of view, and in a normal workplace, say a retailer, where people are working shifts and the store's got to open at a particular time and so on. I drove through Liverpool recently. There were people queuing outside Wetherspoons at 8 a.m. for it to open. If that's not open 8 a.m. on the dot, those people are going to get very upset. And we've all, waited outside places for them to open. Airport check-ins, it's like check-in's supposed to be open now. They haven't, staff aren't even there yet and whatever. We went to Japan a few years ago and the check-in was supposed to open at a certain time, let's say 2 o'clock. And about 5 to 2, 10 to 2, the check-in staff start coming and sitting down and we're like, come on, the staff are there now, come on. They can open now, don't, just because it says 2 o'clock, they don't have to open at 2 o'clock. If they're there, just, if you're at work, just start working. Now, on the very stroke of 2 o'clock, the manager comes out to the side, all the check-in staff come out from behind their desks and all in unison bow to the waiting passengers and then go back behind their desks and the check-in opens on the stroke of 2 o'clock. So respect to all from all. And, well, it says 2 o'clock. It is 2 o'clock. You can't complain with that, can you? Can't complain about that.
We like boundaries though, don't
We more than
like
like them. Absolutely.
They make it fair, and that's what...
Fairness, that's the issue. So if you're in a workplace where you're struggling to get there 9 o'clock, drop the kids off at the childminders, rush, you get there because 9 o'clock's the start time, somebody else saunters in at 10 past, 15 past, nothing's said to them. How do you start to feel? It's not fair. You start to feel resentful. And what do you do when you feel resentful?
You behave differently.
You behave differently. And you behave differently than you do and you do.
I think there aren't many things more demotivational and erosional, if you like, to culture than that.
Absolutely.
It's then the good people that you start to lose the faith of because they're like you say, why do I bother?
Yeah.
And let's be honest, in most organisations you've got more good people, and they're the people that you want to keep, aren't you? And reinforce those beliefs. So yeah.
So there used to be a supermarket, convenience supermarket called Summerfield. Anybody remember Summerfield? They were bought out by the co-op. And I did an exercise where I went and modelled their highest performing store managers to find out what's going on inside the heads of the highest performing store managers. And the highest performing store managers measured both in terms of sales and waste, so that's financial measures, and staff satisfaction. Both said the same thing. If somebody's late, instant warning. Doesn't matter what the reason is, doesn't matter who they are. And they said 4 out of 5 times they never have another problem with that person. Because it was genuinely accident, bus broken down, something like that. That's only ever going to happen, once a year anyway, so it's not a problem. And everybody's treated fairly. But they said that 1 out of 5 times where you've got somebody who's a persistent problem, you've already started the process to get that person out. Oh, that's too harsh. Oh no, that's too black and white, that's too strict. No, it's not, it's fair. Because everybody knows the rules, everybody signed up to the same rules, and everybody likes the fact that they get treated the same as everybody else. And that applies to the manager, as well as to the staff in those stores.
And some of us have walked into schools where when you have your first meeting with the staff, and they say, it's very cliquey here, and you're in your head. Give an example.
Yeah, exactly. So the tacit rule modifies the explicit rule.
Then, I don't know, for me, there's no one to help me, just being honest. Didn't read your book then, but I'd say you spend a while observing
Well, exactly, because that's the only way you'll learn the tacit rules. You learn how do things really work.
Yeah.
What do you really have to do? Do I really have to get here at 9 o'clock? Do I really have to pick up litter? Do I really have to show respect to all? Do I really have to not vape anywhere in the building? But what about that little corner around the back of the sports block and window? What about there? Is that all? You know?
Is it, Peter, not about talking about your real sense of purpose? Because you fundamentally want to trust people. So if you're...
Because? Why do you fundamentally want to trust people? This is a very important point.
Because I suppose this is a personal thing. I truly believe that most people want to do a good job, and the premise that you trust that the majority. You don't set rules really for the minority. I don't think you want to. You can flex the rules if people buy into your vision, what you're trying to achieve, particularly in the education profession, where you're fundamentally wanting to make a difference to young people, young children.
You are, and many people are. That's a very important point. We'll come on to this. And it's a really dangerous area of culture for you all as CEOs. Fundamentally, you want to trust people because you want to be trusted. Fundamentally, you want to make a difference. You want your staff to make a difference because you want to make a difference. But you might not want to. You might want something else. You might want something else.
Just, I'm interested in the observation of where things go completely wrong, that's a failure, we had an inadequate school. The build-up of the tacit rules over the explicit rules without the challenge has led to catastrophic failure. And this is one of our schools. It's restoring now. But looking back, it was, well, we go the extra mile, we enrichment, all of these things you say, and actually staff had stopped doing those things. They were walking down the corridor looking miserable, mainly because they were frightened of, engaging with the kid and turning away off and nobody does anything and all of those things. So the explicit rules that were strong, but that were completely lost during lockdown, and a whole set with engage with families properly. But that, it's just fascinating to me how quickly that can happen, and therefore your 1 in 5 rule of actually you need to tackle everything when somebody's looking miserable. You can challenge it through humour and so on. You can be miserable in your staff room if you have to be, but you can't be miserable on the corridors for kids whose lives, frankly.
And it can change very fast in either direction.
I'm struggling with the word rule as a
yes.
Which I find, I wrote down something very black and white, which I think is really measurable, whereas you took something which is much less measurable, much more difficult to kind of find out when it's not right, and therefore that's really easy to hold people account to, because if I see it, you're going to get disciplined or whatever happens, whereas that is nuance. And I just wonder what your reflections are on your choice of language about rules, because I don't think actually, I don't have many rules in my organisation for the people as I do expectations or aspirations or norm, and so I'm just a little bit muddled in that way.
You could say rules, you could say expectations, you could say aspirations, you could say norms. It's all the same.
Is it?
Yeah, same. I'm using all of those collectively as somebody knows the way to behave in this situation.
Because I write down rules in my code of conduct. It says in my code of conduct, don't vape or smoke on any of our sites. But it doesn't say treat people with respect, but I want that. I do that through I communicate that in a different way.
So you've made that so you've made it a tacit rule.
Maybe.
And then if you see something contravening that tacit rule, you haven't told everybody to be respectful, but you expect it. What do you do?
I think I would challenge it, but I guess my point is it's the communication of it. I don't class what I'm thinking of as a rule in the same kind of field of rules as your class of rule, your rule around be nice.
Right.
Where I say we have that as a trust dividend. Talk about being kind and driven, they're not incompatible. We have that.
There's lots of different ways that we create rules. Like, for example, the environment creates rules. So when you walked in here this morning, if you'd never been here before, how did you know where to sit? How did you know to sit?
We saw a chair.
Sorry?
We didn't, we just saw a chair.
You saw a chair. Well, you saw a chair, so you knew to sit on a chair. You knew not to sit on the edge here. or out there. You saw a screen and thought there's a presentation, so I won't sit my back to the screen. So we created rules through the environment. We didn't have to say, you are allowed to sit. We didn't put a seating plan up, which is a form of a rule, but we created a rule in the environment.
So the thing that, with scale and with schools joining with their own culture into a matter with growth, the bigger you get, the harder it is to kind of role model it, at which point, so we now do define their expectations, our staff behaviours, the thing up there. And there's something in the, unless you do that, you're relying on 13 leaders of schools to live and breathe the thing, and actually some of those don't live. One of ours doesn't live or breathe it at all, frankly. I won't say which one, but it's manifest in all sorts of ways, and unless you've got a framework for saying, well, when you do that, it doesn't fit. So I think there's something in the explicit, but I know what you mean. It relies on your leaders living and breathing respect.
If you're happy with the way your culture is, everybody's happy, there's a sense of belonging, everything works as it should work, absolutely fine. But if you ever wanted to change it, so for example, if you acquired another school, you merged with another trust, and suddenly you want to define your culture, you've got to start writing that stuff down.
It's easy to talk about some rules and then what I would call behavioural rules, which are behaviour rules that have impact on another. My caretaker smokes on, or has a vape around the corner on site. It doesn't impact on anybody else. Well, not directly anyway, whereas actually the expectations of behaviour do impact, don't they, on everybody's well-being and productivity in the sense of being able to...
But if somebody sees that and they think, oh, it's one rule for him and a different rule for me, and then we go down that slope. Okay. So any organisation, we could talk about culture in 3 distinct areas. So if you were to start an organisation, let's say you decided you start your own business tomorrow. Where would you begin? Would you start with people, the who? Would you say, oh, I've got a couple of really good colleagues and I'm going to take those people because they're great and I'm going to start a business. So examples of businesses that started with people and those individuals and what they knew and who they knew, like Steve Jobs or James Dyson, typically very charismatic leaders, very visible people, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Trevor Obeson. Anybody heard of him? Well known for, he was the superhead, the original superhead, recently been barred from ever running a school. But one of Tony Blair's saviours of the education system. Look him up, makes interesting reading. Managed to hoover through 500,000 in a very short space of time. And so we start with people. We say, and this is very common for businesses, you've got a mate who's, good at doing a certain thing, and you say, oh, let's go into business together and let's do that thing. Like, I don't know, let's say you got a friend who's really good at baking cakes. Hey, let's open a cake shop together or whatever. Or do you start with program? Program, which you'll see here, actually has been renamed process. But program is the what do you do? Do you make chairs? Or do you print books? Or do you service photocopiers? Or do you provide electricity? Or supply coffee to offices, or do you teach kids, or whatever? So what's the program? What is it that you do or provide? So you do start with that. Do you think, I'm going to start an oven cleaning franchise? I'm going to buy an oven cleaning franchise, and I'm going to go around people's houses cleaning their ovens. You just start with the what you do, the program. Or do you start with the place, the physical environment, like the school, the church, the town hall, campus, a tower block, remote working even. So do you start with the place? Do you start with the office space or the trading space and say, right, I'm going to build a business out of this? So what would you each individually say? Would you start, if you wanted to start a business tomorrow, would you start with people and what's in their heads and what they can do? Would you start with program, what your business is going to do? Or would you start with place, where your business is going to be?
I consider all 3 because I think all
pick
3 stars have got to align.
Yeah,
if I were to retire and set up a coffee shop, I'd have to...
So you've just answered the question, retire and start a coffee shop, so you start with program. Okay, very good. Anybody else? And then I've got to find the right place for my coffee shop, so you start with program.
I'll do purpose. Why do it in the first
Why do the thing? So that's program, very good. What else? Anybody start with people? Anybody
can't
think,
want to have people
I know
that-
somebody is really good at something and we could make
Yeah.
a business out of that.
Otherwise it'll flop.
Or I know somebody who's been in education all their lives, they know everything about, they're terrific and we're going to start a consultancy or whatever it might be.
I have that friend, yeah, I might do.
Yeah, okay, very good. Excellent. Most people will say program. The next most common answer is people. Almost nobody ever says place. However, if you start a business based on people, you're now dependent on those people. And we've seen lots of businesses fail because the person who was the business upped and left or changed their mind or their circumstances changed. We see it with family businesses. It happened with Ratners, where the Ratner who started the business handed it over to son Gerald, who'd worked in that business all his life, but didn't really understand it because he'd worked there. He was always going to be CEO. He never had to hear the phrase from the recruiter, "I'm sorry, Mr. Ratner, on this occasion your application has been unsuccessful." So it doesn't matter that he worked in a shop and drove a van and whatever. He never faced rejection. That was always going to be his empire. And what did he do with it? Because he didn't understand it. What did he do with it?
Made a comment in me.
Yeah, he threw it away.
Comment about his products.
Threw it away. He discredited and insulted his own customers. And the business has gone overnight. Rupert Murdoch would be an example. And he's just going through this problem of trying to step back and put in place a succession plan and change his mind about what his succession plan is going to look like. Changed his mind about who his successor is going to be. Now his kids are suing him.
Isn't it around feelings of power?
Well, it can be because
Well, they must have some
there are situations, and I think Ratness is probably one, and I've seen many others in family businesses, where the second generation who didn't create that business observes and thinks what my dad does or my mum or my uncle or whoever does is about power, or it's about, bossing people around. So that's what I'm going to do. But they don't understand why they're doing it. That's back to Michelle's point on purpose. They don't understand why they do that in order to create that business. And so it fails. It's happened with Eddie Stobart. So the founder, I think, died. The son took over. He's messed things up a bit. Happened with Trevor Beeson, with all of his schools his trust getting shut down and all the schools getting rebrokered and nightmare. If we start with program, we're tied to one thing that we do. It can only be a coffee shop. So we've got companies like Kodak and Blockbuster and Nokia and Tyrac that did one thing, and that's what their whole business model and everything they did was tied to that one thing, and that was all that they could do. And when the outside world changed, they couldn't respond fast enough to that change. But if you start with place, when you build the right place, it will attract the right people, and the right people will run the right program.
Yeah, but you've got to have a culture of involving everybody. The people you're talking about are what I would describe as hero heads, hero leaders.
Oh,
all
those people, yes.
All involved
yes.
around them.
Yeah.
And that's the route. That a trust or a family school set up in that way won't survive the next.
Who's the most important person in a school or a school trust?
The most important person.
You say that, but who does the parent want to talk to when something goes wrong? Want to talk to their head. And like it or not, everybody looks to you all to learn how to be and what to do, and the culture evolves around you. And one of the things that's happened in the education sector, and Guy alluded to this in his introduction, was that being a relatively new sector in terms of the MAT structure, schools have been here for hundreds of years, of course. Learning has been here since we were amoeba. But the MAT sector, being relatively new, is evolving, and power structures are evolving, and mergers and acquisitions, not really here yet, but they will come, especially if Ofsted start inspecting trusts. Then we'll start seeing mergers and acquisitions, I think, more so than we have done now. Added to the pressure from, if the DfE continue with the pressure of how many schools have got to be in a trust, and if that goes somewhere, who knows? And what's happening now is, because it's a who knows situation, There are some visionary CEOs, probably you all, probably why you're here, thinking we don't want to wait until we are told. We want to do something about it now. We want to be in charge of our own destiny, because actually my vision of what I want to do with the school is more important than anybody else, is more important than what the DFE, making a difference in the kids' lives, is more important than what the DFE want. So I'm going to protect my interests by acting ahead of whatever I think the government might, in their infinite wisdom, introduce at some point.
But just on place, I guess for me it depends how you define place. So if you define it as the community you're serving with the parents and the young people, and then the adults that you bring into the place, then if that's the definition of place, then you can run with it. It's not buildings matter, but actually the top two.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, being a relatively young sector means you're almost trying to create a culture on top of what was already there before. And your current set of raw materials going through your factory, the students, their parents had an education, and their parents before them had an education. So everybody comes in to your factory with an expectation of what it's going to be like, what the output is, what the deliverable is, what they have to do with it. So if you're trying to create a culture now based on something that already exists, you've inherited a building, you've inherited that with all the good and bad things about it, and you're now trying to introduce a culture, you're trying to define place when somebody just gave you the place and say, right, that's your school now, I'll leave you to
But
it.
isn't all of those people, so I agree with Guy's point about the place not being a building as such but a community, but aren't all those people, like many of us, thinking we can do something different? So I suppose the whole MAT agenda came about from people thinking we can do something different.
Exactly.
All of those people set something up because they wanted to create something different too. So then you have, if you change the word rules to behaviours, your language and behaviours that you model, if you have a hierarchy, most organisations do, but if you can make sure that you live by your behaviours and your language, then the place you create, the purpose around it, and the people that work there are likely to reflect that. Well, maybe that's
Well, there's a lot of businesses, a lot of organisations going through that same struggle right now. Does the place really matter? Because we all had to work remotely for a couple of years recently, and so you don't really need an office, and a lot of companies got rid of offices and shut offices down. Now we're seeing the opposite. Now we're seeing companies like Amazon and others saying, right, no more home working, everybody's going to be back in the office. What would it be like if the school wasn't a physical place? What was it like during COVID? Hard work.
Harder work.
Harder work, yeah.
So just hugely unequal, wasn't it? The capacity of home learning for the disadvantage and struggle didn't exist.
Yeah, so it magnified the problem of disadvantage.
Tips, and I went to see them all sat on the railway bank getting pissed all day every day. That was interesting, but they weren't,
teachers, weren't they?
they weren't online doing their maths.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, yeah.
But I also
That
don't
was the
think
staff room.
I also don't think you can shape the story to what you want either, because the MAT experience also brought out not so good traits in people.
So if you think about programme, you might say, well, what the school would provide education, but is that the programme really? What would you say your programme is? What is it your MAT does? Education students, we could say that's the output. Well, that's not how you do what you do. What do you really do? You said make a difference.
I'd like to give children a voice.
Give children a voice. Now this is starting to sound like purpose or vision, isn't it? That's what you really do. And if you do that in this place, the result is A-level results, for example. It's one thing that's an easy measure. So, some of you talked about behaviour. The culture emerges from the behaviour of multiple people. What happens if a single person defines the culture? What happens if we've got somebody who's a visionary and a strong leader and has their strong vision for what they think education should look like, what they think the education experience should be. And Tony Blair ends up just giving them a whole load of money and say, go and fix the education system. What happens if a single person defines the culture? And one of the things which I've seen time and time again, and I did a research project on this a few years back that is in a book called Building Your Career Capital, is that leaders will tend to hire younger versions of themselves. Nothing wrong with that in itself, if that's the culture that you want and you want to maintain that culture, and if that's, you know, working, whatever that means, whatever you define that as. But a culture that's based on a single person is a cult, and in general cults tend to be unstable over time, for the simple reason that in order for that organisation to grow, we've got to have other people doing the same thing that that leader is doing. And like with examples like Eddie Stobart and Gerald Ratner, they don't know how that person thinks. They don't really know, so they do their version. They engage in the rituals of that person, but they don't really know how to do it. And so that's where the instability comes in, because they don't really know why they're doing what they're doing.
I do agree that it shouldn't come from one person, but in this role, it's got to permeate from you.
And yet, exactly, it can't not.
It's that permeation. Certainly, I found different in this role to being a head teacher, whereas it's easier as a head teacher to permeate that culture because you're on the ground with the staff all the time and the parents, and you've got that constant contact day to day at school level. But you don't have that in this role. You know,
right.
You have the concept, you have that sort of contact with the people who are driving that. But I think there's a dilution, really, of that in more of an executive role. And I think that's more of a challenge to embed culture, maybe.
Absolutely. And your computers are Dell. Dell's an interesting example because some of you will know who the CEO of Dell is. Michael Dell. And so in the early days, Dell, synonymous, Michael, he was the guy who was going to differentiate, going to revolutionise the computer industry, because you could buy your own, you could specify, and they'd put it together and you get exactly what you wanted. Nowadays, who's the CEO of Dell now? Who's the CEO of Asus? Who's the CEO of Microsoft? Some of you will say Bill Gates, but he's not the CEO. I'm not even sure he's still the chairman.
But I guess that's
exactly.
I guess that's true.
But if anybody looks at your website, how easy is it to find out who your CEO is?
Yeah.
Or the head teacher of a school?
Isn't that the challenge of maths? That it's about branches, isn't it? And it's, you know, you look at like any retail, relatively successful, but Marks and Spencer's, okay, go up and down as a roller coaster, but it's created branches and a branch culture of an organisation, and that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that we're not in the branch, we're sitting above the branch, and actually that's where I think we've got lots and lots still to look at and learn from in terms of what business is doing.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's where our conversation really started all those years ago, is looking at an organisation like Tesco Express. Would you know that you were standing in a Tesco Express as opposed to any other convenience store? And how do you know? You know, through language and the colours of signs, and even if you took the word Tesco down, you would still know you were in a Tesco Express. Staff behaviours, you would see it evident on the shelves. So, for example, if you go, next time you go into a cafe, coffee shop, something like that, have a look at the fridge. Is everything in the fridge at the front? Or as people take from the front, does the stuff that's in the fridge move towards the back, if you see what I mean? In retail, they call it fronting up. And every so often, every half an hour or so, staff have a rule that says they have to go and pull everything forward to make it look attractive. But a lot of places don't do that, they just leave it at the back. Some retailers have a policy that says they front up by taking all the old stock off, putting the new stock at the back, and then the old stock back on the front again. Otherwise, you're never going to buy milk that's best before tomorrow, are you? And so they have rules about these things, and those rules become routines, and those routines become behaviours. And we have staff who follow the routine because they look at their sheet for the day and go, oh, what time is it? It's 10 to 11. well, I better go and check the best before dates on the cheese, and that's what they go and do. And you'll have other staff that will just do that without having to check the checklist, and you'll say, oh, they're really good because they're the best staff because they just know what to do. They don't just know what to do, but there's probably a good chance they'll know why that's important. But in terms of what the customer gets, doesn't make a difference.
I was just going to share a thought that's in my mind, that is that you are hugely, I think, most provocative. Because like my brain's kind of like bouncing around the room and everything I'm saying, I'm like, right? But one of the things that's kind of like coming through, I think, and I just want you to clarify for me because I'm a bit all over the shop with my thinking at the moment, is I think we've got a bit of a systems problem, which is that when we were the heads in our schools, we could kind of like set provision to a certain extent, and we were brought up in a time where it should come from the head teacher, like this vision of what we want to achieve, right? And once upon a time we were teachers and we were in control of a classroom, so as a head you would be in control of it, right? But as a CEO, I actually don't think the culture is necessarily going to be dictated by us or come from us. I challenge that thinking because ultimately I think we're here to enable groups of people to be the best that they can be. And I also hear a lot from lots of different places that schools still want their own culture, right? So there's this real mismatch going on of, we all want to have teachers where we control everything and set everything, and I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of the time, right? And we're probably successful, which is why we're doing what we're doing now. Whereas when you become that CEO, like we're saying about those CEOs here on the website, can you find them, because you know who they are? It's now time to like I think, cool that a little bit, because actually if we're enabling the best people in the best environments and all of the things that you mentioned, the culture should naturally happen. And then we've got this kind of like backstop, which is code of conducts and policies and procedures that generally will keep everybody on the straight and narrow. So is it essential that it's our way anymore? And so my thinking comes to the place of actually, no, it's not. That's kind of like what's been happening in my head. Am I barking up the right tree, or am I...
No, it's a very interesting question. That's exactly what we did
Can I
here.
just say something?
Yeah.
I mean, just kind of hearing you and kind of like very similar to my own beliefs. And actually, I would say, if that is what you believe, that is the culture of your trust. You know, if you're very much of the belief that, you know, each school should have its own culture and own way of doing things and valuing the uniqueness and stuff like that, I would say in essence, that's the culture of your trust. You know, that's the way that I would see it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what we did here. So when we were developing the distinctive culture here, one of the tasks was identifying what is a trust level culture that applies to every school, and what is a school level culture that allows that school to retain its distinctiveness within its local community. And that's very much about place.
But isn't enabling as well that bit about you still have to have your purpose, your why, whatever that might be, and that's a challenge for us, isn't it? Because we've got a curriculum that often dictates our why. We've got we've got the DFE, we've got, you know, all aspects that sort of control that why to some degree. But ultimately, it's your purpose that will influence how you enable. So when you talked at the beginning about, do you call it performance management or appraisal or professional growth or whatever, that is your principle of how you enable or you coach people to be the on the ground developers of. And I suppose there's lots of trusts now that are saying, lots of schools who won't join a trust because they don't want to lose the uniqueness, or one of the cautiousnesses for schools is they don't want to lose what's unique to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel like they're joining your Marks and Spencers, your Tesco Express, will do it this way because that's the way. And ultimately we set out to do something different, didn't we? Because we thought that actually the way the local authority is one way, but we believe, naively, arrogantly, whatever you think, that we can do it slightly differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, better.
Principally better.
Yes, of course. Otherwise, why would you do it? And so a school like that might be attracted to a trust that says, we're just going to take on all your boring back-end stuff, your finance and your IT and your HR, and leave you to run the school however you want, you do it your way. That would be a very attractive proposition, wouldn't it?
Can I just ask about your trust culture and school culture though? Because I've found that I've swung from this kind of, you know, all do it the same way to, and you know, a little bit describing, but you can have your cake and eat it culture as well. And actually, I think in the middle, I'm not sure there's a sweet spot. I generally am not. I'm in the moment, I'm at the point of, if not careful, my trust culture influences my trust work and what's important. And actually it becomes that they've got two circles singing around, but what's going on at the trust level and what's going on at school level actually become an inconvenience to each other. So it's just the concept of, is there a sweet spot of that? And I don't know, because I'm desperately trying to find it if there is.
But I think that's why we're here to discuss it. I mean, for me, I don't have any answers other than we've tried a load of stuff and at length, and some of it's landed, some not. What I don't believe in is that kind of flat, we'll join to protect ourselves and we just carry on doing what we're doing. I don't see the point in that, although we can have the finance and HR behind. At MAT level, I think we're more than a network. The ways of working and collaboration are not. There's something in parts of schooling of which we haven't done enough of this, where if you take year 11 results, where it is actually this, if you do this, it works, and it works very well. So United Learning, that's all they do, but they do it very well, and their results are very strong. So I think there are, that's a kind of McDonald's model, isn't it, of do this. There are elements of any school where I think we need to be stronger. There's a whole load of other stuff that I wouldn't worry about, and you let people know their community and serve it in different ways, but with some frameworks. What we've done is tried to do bottom up, but then other schools join that are like, oh yeah, that, which is an interesting thing to deal with. But that, so the trustees made us do 2 years of, which I hated them for, of sort of working out, consulting, defining a culture, which we did, and then trying to review it, which is the most complex thing we've done and the hardest thing we've done, which is thrash stuff out, and yet we're still a relatively loose collection of schools where, but I think, I don't know, the stuff that's worked and the stuff that hasn't, I don't have the answer at all. I don't think there is just to do your own thing, which is fine when it's all working. When it fails, how do you send a leader in from one school to another if they're talking a different language with a different behaviour policy? So don't get me wrong, we haven't got a set behaviour policy, but you sometimes think we might have ways of working and language.
And that's a good point, that if in your, one of the ways you want to leverage the value of a trust is by having peer level learning and support, you want to have deputy heads from one school going and helping out at another school, or helping with Ofsted prep or whatever, and those schools are running on totally different cultural systems, that's going to be harder than if you can take people across from one to another and they can learn from each other within this common language and this common understanding. So it depends on how you want to run a trust and what you want to get out of running a trust, of course, as to that. But fundamentally, if you've got alignment from top to bottom of the culture, that's the genuine, the authenticity, the truth, the honesty, that's what they're talking about. The alignment will always be the most efficient in any organisation. That doesn't mean the culture has to be dictated from the top down. The culture can emerge from the bottom up, and that can become integrated at the various levels of the organisation and adopted, and that happens in some organisations. So it doesn't have to be top down. However, we are all here with experience of trying to run an organisation that's inside of this bigger culture that was going on for 100 years before any of us were born.
Like you say, it's like it's a new sector into an existing sector, isn't it? And I think that's where the challenge is, but that's where the interesting bit is, I would guess. But like, if we look kind of like 50 years down the line, that will naturally have happened anyway, won't it? You know, everybody will be in maths of whatever size. There'll be a common language, common way of doing things, not because it's a top-down approach, but because it will have evolved that way. Yeah. But it's still very early days in kind of comparative terms, isn't it?
It is. And in terms of people moving sideways between maths, you know, obviously that's going to happen at teacher level, but at executive level, that movement brings its own challenges in terms of cultural integration. I'm conscious of time, because we've got 2 more sessions, which are, what, half an hour each or 10 minutes? I just want to make a couple more points. So culture as an emergent property, back to somebody's point over there, what happens if we don't create a culture?
It will emerge anyway.
There'll still be one. But it might not be, what you want or efficient, and it won't have the same purpose as you would have. And ultimately, whose name is it above the door?
Yours.
Mine.
Yours.
Actually, yeah. The Castle Phoenix is mine. You'll have heard the most common thing I hear about change management is people are resistant to change. No, they're not. People are highly adaptable to change. Think how easily you adapt to be here, to be at home, to be with your friends, to be on the train, to be with colleagues, different situations, to go on holiday to another country and fit in and make friends and so on. Because we all seek belonging, because if you, Google did a project a few years ago to figure out what was it that was the essence of their highest performing teams, and they found the only thing that their high performing teams had in common was the members of the team felt there was a strong sense of psychological safety. And that comes from belonging, feeling accepted, feeling like you fit, whether it's in a small group or a big group or a splinter group or whatever it is. But we all engage in behaviours that seek out likeness and similarity and adjust us and adjust people and adjust the way people dress and adjust the way that people behave and the language that they use so that we belong, and we can change that very quickly and easily. But fundamentally that's what we're looking for in a culture, is that sense of belonging. But more than that, how do we know, where am I? Yeah, more than just a sense of belonging, which again seems quite nebulous and hard to define. Well, you just feel like you fit in. You just feel like you're accepted. But can you create that? Can you manifest that? And one of the really important things is, coming back to rules, is the consistency of rules. If there's a rule in your workplace and that rule changes from day to day, how's that going to make you feel? Like if your boss, whoever that is, says yes to your request or your plan, or no, depending on what mood they're in, rather than evaluating what you're proposing. How does that make you feel? What do you learn? How do you behave? So one of the things that makes people feel very strongly that sense of psychological safety is knowing the rules and seeing the rules applied consistently. Because now you know what to wear every day. That's one less thing to think about. You know what time to be there. You know what happens if you're not there at that time. You see the same thing happen to your colleagues if they're not there at that time. Feels fair. Still might not be the right workplace for you, for hundreds of different reasons. But you'll look back and say that was a good place to work.
So why are we still talking about a diverse workforce that we don't seem to be able to achieve?
Can't we?
Why are we still talking? We are still talking about it. Yeah? Not
We're still talking about it, but we can't achieve it.
We're still trying to battle with it. We're still trying to talk about attracting people to the profession, seeing the leaders at the top reflecting communities.
Mm-hmm.
Because people like to
Just
look at
a
people
bit.
that look like them.
Yeah.
Big problem actually. It's a big problem because when I get ECTs, I did a walk around the other day and I said, why are you on supply on an M5? Why are you jumping around schools on supply? I do ask them these questions, and they're wringing their hands and they're saying, actually they're telling me a load of lies, to be honest.
20 years ago,
I have to find a way of getting them to tell me what it is that they are doing. Well, you could say they have a right to make their decisions, but I want to probe a bit to find out a stable workforce, to be honest. So.
Well, I know it was 12 years ago. 12 years ago, I did a project with Oxford University Press around cultural diversity. And what they said was, their head of HR sat in a meeting and said, we've looked at our demographics in the organisation, and our average new starter, or first year career, our average person, is a 22-year-old English graduate called Sophie. And we don't have a single female above this management level in the organisation. And once they looked at that data, they started to actually measure one dimension of what they were calling culture. They realised they had absolutely no idea where these men were coming from because they didn't remember recruiting any of them because they weren't the typical. So clearly that typical new joiner is not working their way up through the organisation. They're coming in from somewhere else. So what's that telling people about their career prospects? Interested in a career in teaching? You'll be lucky. You know, if that was an organisation that had that strategy, and one of the things, you know, we've talked about is recruiting from within, even though that can be painful, because what that does is back up that message that teaching is a career.
Where cultures are strong school by school, then retention is very high, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you get a real richness, and that is about fairness, and it is about the vision of success and so on. And it is about defining what we are, which is shaped actually by the map, but is lived and breathed or not by the head in school and the leadership teams.
Exactly, yeah. And so you might not think in terms of the head or the leader driving or creating or dictating that culture, but like it or not, that's who everybody looks to see, well, are they following the rules?
And much more interestingly to me, the anti-culture, where it's led to the exact opposite, which we've experienced at various times, and if you allow that, my experience is, and that can be sort of on the ground, one teacher within a small primary school wrecking the entire culture because we didn't deal with it when they were genuinely anti-culture. So, but what it is, you've got to define in order to say, well, that's not what we do here. Anyway.
I was a bit apprehensive about saying the next thing. Courageous conversations that go shut up sometimes. Courageous conversations that need some help with being brave enough to tackle things as well, you know.
Well, you can still have that conversation, can't you? Because you shouldn't lessen your ambition or aspiration or expectation for greatness or whatever you call it. But it's the way in which your values enable you to have that conversation.
Wonderful. And this is about feedback, because as soon as emotion comes into it, you're using words like courageous and brave, and like you've got to summon up the courage to have a conversation with somebody. The rule says X, you did Y.
I think
That's different to the rule.
I think there's another thing that is interesting that I'm thinking in my mind at the moment, which is around I think people sitting here thinking about culture in their own lives, but I'm sitting here thinking about culture in the profession and how CEOs come together. And I think that it can be really controversial, and does it need to be? But there's no rules for us around that, right? And so we all come together and it's like, how are we going to play today then, folks? Right? So I think we need to start talking about that as well.
But don't you think we're being manipulated? Well, this is probably a bigger thing.
But
manipulated by the press at the current time. Yeah. So there's lots. If you go on social media, there's so much that says, "Oh God, what an awful job education is, being a teacher."
That's worrying us at the moment, to be honest.
And actually it's an amazing job.
Yeah.
And it might not just suit you at that particular time.
And the manifestation of that is young staff basically wringing their hands, aren't they? Thinking, oh, it's too much. Oh, the joy's gone away. So basically, you've got to try and put that back in somehow. But I still think everything's about human interaction. People feel comfortable and looked after, and they have kindness in the right way. Maybe we can salvage something.
I think what I'd say is we've got
trust, isn't it? And how much people.
We've got time for networking afterwards, haven't we? We've got 2 sessions and then networking time.
About 5 minutes now to get a coffee.
So I've got a couple more points I want to get across to you. There's 2 other speakers who are going to say completely different things to what I've said, all being well. And you're going to figure it out by talking to each other afterwards, exactly in that way. But changing language and rules is easy. You put up some new posters, change the policy handbook. But what is it that influences the pace of change? If you're trying to change a culture, what would you say is the biggest factor that influences how fast that culture changes?
Whether they come with you or not.
Yeah. What influences that?
You know, here we are, this is it, doesn't work. So that 2 years, so that whole sort of slow is smooth and smooth is fast is taking the time to build, is rather than rushing that because you feel you've got to fix it, is I think matters. And yet we're always rushing, we're operational, and creating just this space is a challenge, isn't it? But, half of us.
You can do quick fixes, so the pace of change can be very quickly. But I think cultural, I always think 3 years minimum to really tweak, shape.
Well, you get turnover of people in that time. And what I would say is the major factor that influences the pace of change is integrity. If you say, we're going to have this new rule, but you don't have to follow it, you'll be all right, because I know, you're okay, and you'll be all right. You have to follow the rule.
She always does.
Just use your best judgment. So if my creation of new rules lacks integrity, and I don't apply those consistently, that creates conflict, that slows down the pace of change. So if I say, right, new school day is now going to start at 8:30, starting September, that's what we do. We just get on with it.
Except that presumption is that everybody wants to follow a rule or is complicit in following a rule, and that they're happy by following a rule. So I might be a real rule follower because I might be my personality that I like to do that. Doesn't mean I'm going to love where I am just because I'm...
It might not. You might not love it. You might hate it.
So it doesn't equal just by following the rules or that you're going to have a great culture.
If as a leader your attitude is, it's really hard to recruit and we can't afford to lose anybody and we've got to keep everybody and we've got to make allowances for everybody, your culture will forever be pushed and pulled by what they want. Because you're letting them know they call the shots. If your culture is our culture, and like in a business world, our brand, reputation, is more important than any one person. To Summerfield, our customer service is more important than anybody else, than anything else, than any member of staff. Then over time what you will have turnover of staff. For people, I don't like it, I don't like the changes, I'm going to go somewhere else. That's good for them, because they get to find somewhere that's a better fit for who they are and how they want to work. And you get people who are better fit for who you are, how you want to work. And that doesn't make any of those people good or bad or right or wrong or better or worse. You prefer doing your job in this country to doing a different job in a different country because you like the way it works and the way things happen and it fits you and whatever. And you could get a same job on paper in another trust and be that square peg in the round hole and hate it and not be happy. And on paper it's the same job. So integrity, we've got integrity in two ways. We've got integrity of the starting point. This is very common. We start by saying this is where our culture is now, and we're great and we're honest and we're open and we listen to our staff, and your staff laugh and say, no you don't. And by lying, we're really back here. If we start with that courage and we say our culture right now is we usually don't listen to staff unless they're saying something that we already agree with. You might think that's a really painful thing to say. I can't say that. Everyone will then know the secret. Everybody knows anyway. But your honesty will be rewarded and would probably move you closer. So the key thing is, if you're not starting any journey from where you actually are, doesn't matter what strategy or plan you come up with, it's irrelevant because you're not starting from where you are. You're starting from where you're pretending to be. That's obvious. And then integrity of explicit and tacit rules. If you say, we start at 9 o'clock, well, give or take. If you're SLT, I expect you in by 8 o'clock. If we say we reward results, but people who fail are rewarded as well. Saw that in an engineering company, they said, if we hit all our projects on time and on budget, everyone gets a £2,000 bonus. They, once again, as usual, completely were nowhere near their budget and time targets, gave everybody the bonus anyway, because, well, we've promised it now. And of course the managers got it too, and they can't have it and not get it. It's not their money, so everybody got it. £2 million. But you need some flexibility, right? I mean, it's a bit of give and take. I mean, what if somebody misses their bus? What if this? What if that? That's fine. The more flexible you are over that integrity, the longer it takes. That's not a criticism. It doesn't have to take 5 minutes. It takes as long as you want it to take. But it's the integrity that drives that. Anybody remember a TV show called Super Nanny? So there was one where the Super Nanny comes to this couple, mother's tearing their hair out, father comes home from work, he wants to play with the kids, have fun with the kids. Kids are all wound up, wired up, they don't want to go to bed, and this situation perpetuates day after day. Super nanny comes, goes through some sort of discipline routines and all the usual, stuff that she used to do. And they wave her off for the weekend, and as the super nanny shuts the front door, the dad turns to the kid and says, she's gone, now we can go back to doing whatever we want again. He hasn't undone what the super nanny's done, he's gone backwards. Because now, when she comes back the next week, the rule now is ignore everything that she says. Who's in charge in that family? Who sets the rules? The child. Because dad wants time with the child, whatever the child wants to do is what dad does, that overrides what mum does. Super nanny is so far down the list. Be wary of experts. Somebody saying, well, what we did and what worked for us is not what works for you, because different place, different program, different people. And all results are built on the current culture, which is different from one mat to another, different from one school to another, different from one department to another, if we let it be. So what very common thing in the corporate world is hiring a leader with a track record who utterly fails and then gets blamed for that failure because, obviously lied in his interview, he couldn't do what he said he was going to do. Yeah. Different culture, different shaped peg. So my top tips to leave you with: be honest about where you are now, even though you don't like it, and even though to say it out loud is embarrassing and perhaps even shameful. Chelsea's going to email these to you as well. You won't surprise anybody, and you'll get points for honesty. Define the future picture. That picture is in your head. Don't make that a collaborative effort. Don't ask everybody what that picture should be. That picture's in your head. You've got a vision for making a difference, or for giving children a voice, or for creating a fabulous future generation, or changing people's relationship with learning, or whatever it might be. That's your vision. And in your head is a picture of what that looks like that probably comes from way back in your experience in life when somebody inspired you. Don't be afraid of that. It's integrity with that vision is what will drive a high-performing culture. Define the rules. What does that picture have in it? What does it not have in it? And what are the tacit rules around that? What's the leeway around those rules? The speed of change is driven by integrity. And be prepared to lose people who'll be a better fit and happier somewhere else. So one of the schools, one of the trusts where they've built a culture around this way of thinking, I was there a couple of months ago, and they had one of those days when the kids from the primary school come and have a look around the big school. I can't remember what it's called. And so they had an assembly. Transition day, that's it. So they had an assembly, and one of the deputy heads, or whatever the job title is now, basically said, this is us, this is your chance to have a look around us, see how we work, see if you like it here. If you don't, other schools are available. It's basically what she said, it a bit more tactfully, but that was the essence of it. And I just thought, that's beautiful. What a way to empower people. You've got a choice, and this might not be your choice. We're fine with that. You don't have to shop in Tesco Express. Other convenience stores are available. But we ain't going to change the way we run our shop because you don't like it. Build a culture, not a cult. That'd be the most important thing. Because I think one of the things we've got in the education system's natural evolution is heads become CEOs, and everybody looks to you for all the answers and to tell us what to do. And if you fall into the trap of answering people and telling them what to do, then of course you've taken responsibility. You're now accountable for what they're doing. So build a culture, not a cult. So I think that's it. That's it. We've had questions throughout, so no need for questions. That's me. That's all. Thank you very much.